All right, it's time to look into what's trending in employment law. Lawyer, you're on the clock.
This week, I talked about a really interesting ballot measure up in the state of Massachusetts, and I want to follow up on that one. So on Tuesday, voters in Massachusetts gave Uber and Lyft drivers a very novel way to unionize. And it's definitely, I can say this will definitely head to the court system. I think there will also be legislative efforts to rein in this law. The ballot measure basically allows Uber and Lyft drivers and other gig economy workers to unionize even though they are independent contractors. So they're not employees, so it doesn't come within the ambit of the National Labor Relations Act, at least not as I understand it. And so I don't know that there will be challenges to this law under the National Labor Relations Act. I would have to really dig in and look at that and get creative. I think that more likely what you're going to see is challenges in the state court system in Massachusetts. Union advocates had really made an aggressive push for this legislation. It's the first of its kind in the country, and it creates a state-supervised process for drivers of ride-hailing services to organize, unionize, negotiate their wages, benefits, and other terms and conditions of employment while still being independent contractors. Most states had tried to go after the independent contractor model and try to make the employees of the Ubers and Lyft, try to make the workers of Ubers and Lyfts employees, which would give them a right to organize. This allows them to remain independent contractors, but have the right to organize. So,
so Burt, let me just ask a few questions on this. So the National Labor Relations Act doesn't necessarily cover this, but they voted a law to say that an independent contractor may unionize. But the unionization that we think of in our country falls under the National Labor Relations Act. So this is kind of outside that system of the National Labor Relations Act. I would expect that the Labor Act would say, well, you can unionize, but you have to determine what does that mean and how do your rules work, because this is how the National Labor Relations Act rules work, and they are not part of what you just voted on.
Yeah, so the National Labor Relations Act applies to employees, non-managerial, non-supervisory employees. This law is different because it allows unionization of independent contractors, sort of in a sector. So this is like sector organizing, which is, like you said, very similar to what you might see in unions. I mean, in Europe. And so it's a really remarkable mechanism that this law contains. It requires unions only to win 5% support from active drivers from a ride-hailing platform for the state to provide contact information for all the active drivers. And then once they do that, then they only need to win 25% of the active drivers to be certified as those drivers' bargaining representative. Very, very different from the National Labor Relations Act rules, where it takes basically 50% plus one of the people who actually vote in the election to win. This is 25%.
Wow. You talk about, now when I think about labor unions and so forth, and you think about unions are about fairness and voting and majority. That's what I think of as one of the things that was a foundation of, American labor unions when they started, majority. And here they're saying, oh, no, throw this majority thing out because it doesn't really apply to, we don't want majority to apply to us. We only want 25% to apply to us. Yeah, that's quite interesting.
So that's going to definitely be litigated, because what happens to those other 75% of the union members, or the Uber and Lyft drivers who might not want to be represented? And just so to put it in perspective here, This basically means that nearly 100,000 rideshare drivers in Massachusetts may be forced into union ranks, and so it's going to be. I'm definitely going to be keeping my eyes on this one.
Yeah, that's a
Yep.
really good one. Hey, I just, Bert, I mean, it's a good day. I know you're feeling good about some of the election results and so forth. And I just want to point out something from our friend Dave in the chat here. Not too often does Dave throw you a compliment.
Oh boy, I haven't seen it.
And I'm looking at the chat here, and he says, Bert is right about the turkey. So you and Dave have found some common ground to build from there. So Dave, there you go. Look at it. It depends. Burt Garland.
A gift from my friend Phil Brandt.
Yeah, I love it. It's I hope
Abe.
it keeps your coffee warm. I just say good morning to Ginger. She's always following the program. She works up in Illinois, and she thinks that training education is, the way to go to improve respectful communications, not just on the issue of politics, but other things. And I couldn't agree more with you, Ginger. I hope I see you next week at the roundtable as well. She always shows up. All right, Bert, I'm sorry. I'm taken away from the program here.
That's all right, Phil. So another one, and I'm just going to touch this on the surface, but with Trump taking the White House, the Republicans firmly in charge in the Senate and likely in the House of Representatives as well, I do expect to see some pretty sweeping changes at the federal administrative agencies for purposes of our program, really kind of focusing on the EEOC, the Department of Labor, and the NLRB. And again, just touching on the surface. Keep in mind that Trump will not get control of either the EEOC or the NLRB till about 1 to 1.5 years into his presidency because of the staggered expiration terms of the members. So at the EEOC, there are 5 commissioners. Those staggered terms will create a situation where Trump really won't get full control of the EEOC until about 1 to 1.5 years into his presidency. Similarly, the National Labor Relations Board, there are 5 board members. The expiration of those terms means that he won't get full control of the NLRB until about 1.5 years into his presidency as well. And this is no different than when Biden took over from Trump. It took about a year or so, 6 months, I think, at the NLRB and maybe a year at the EEOC for Biden to get control. Maybe I have them backwards, but these staggered terms, it's nothing unusual. But I do think it will limit the ability of Trump to make massive changes immediately, but I do think over the course of his presidency, changes will be coming. The one I do anticipate may be taken up at the congressional level is I do think that the Congress will be focused on at least attempting to try to rein in employers' DE&I efforts. So keep that one on the radar at the department. So that's would directly impact the EEOC. The Department of Labor, I think that you will see the department itself backing away from trying to classify independent contractors as employees. And I think you will also see them backing away from trying to classify employers and staffing agencies as joint employers. And again, I'm just touching the surface here. I also think you'll see not as great of an effort to pursue minimum wage increases or salary threshold increases. I do think that this makes it probably more likely than not that the January 1 salary threshold increase that is supposed to go into effect may not go into effect. I think this tips the scales a little bit. The mechanism for increasing this next minimum wage looked like the one proposed during the Obama administration, which was struck down by the court system. If this gets struck down, you could expect that Trump's DOL would not appeal the striking down of that. So we will definitely have to keep our eyes on that one. And then the one that I'm a little less certain about is the National Labor Relations Board. I think this is really interesting because there are many unions and more importantly, many union members who helped push Trump to victory this time. And so I think that
look at some of those swing states, and we're going to take a look at that here in a minute, but he got a lot of support for some union members.
He did. And even unions, by not endorsing Harris, helped Trump. And there are unions that actually did endorse Trump. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, because I'm just not so sure that the Trump administration, I think you will see him reining in things like joint employer. And I think you'll see him his administration reining in things like employment policies, not making them so onerous on employers. But as far as union organizing goes, I'm not so sure that the administration will make a big push to try to switch the organizing mechanism that's in place. Now, the one thing I do think that'll happen is that there was a decision or procedural rule that went into effect at the NLRB, sort of flipping the organizing process on its head. We've talked about it many times on the program. I do see that one getting changed back to the way it used to be. But other than that, I think the timeframes for unions to file petitions and the date of the election, I think those are likely to remain, somewhat consistent moving forward. So, but there is one thing I can assure you will happen at the NLRB.
All right, here it comes. I've heard you talk about this one several times. Yeah.
Yes. So, when Biden got into office, basically on day one of his administration, he told the general counsel of the NLRB at the time, Trump's general counsel of the NLRB, Peter Robb, to resign immediately, even though he still had plenty of time left in his term. And when Peter Robb said he wasn't going to resign, he got fired. It was literally on day 1 or 2 of the Biden administration. Just recently, within the last couple months, we've talked about it on the program here, a court upheld Biden's authority to terminate Peter Robb as the general counsel of the NLRB, said that was a lawful exercise of power by the President of the United States. Well, the current general counsel of the NLRB, her name is Jennifer Abruzzo, and she has been really quite an activist general counsel at the NLRB, going after things such as non-compete agreements, non-solicitations, confidentiality agreements. And I do see that stuff getting reined back in under the Trump administration. I guess I would say that on day 1 of the Trump administration, I expect Jennifer Abruzzo to be fired.
Yeah. Well, I just gotta have some. I expect that will happen very early in his control and decision making process. But I just is there anyone else you can think of that Biden fired?
Not offhand.
No, me either. I'm like, the one person he picked to fire was Peter Robb.
Yeah.
That I know for sure. Find that interesting.
All right. I'm sure there were others. Yeah, just kind of on the
maybe.
lighter side. I always like to find one of these cases to end on the lighter side here, Phil. I've had some litigation over the course of my career. I think the oldest lawsuit I've ever dealt with, it took about 7 years from the date of the employment decision until the lawsuit got wrapped up. I've got nothing on this case. And this is still going on. A New York federal judge just rejected a bid from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and an ironworkers union to resolve a 53-year-old lawsuit.
Oh my goodness!
Yes, dragged on forever.
Yeah.
Yes, and the case involved Ironworkers Local 580's treatment of Black and Hispanic members, saying that basically that the union was disproportionately assigning working hours for Black and Latino members. The case was filed back in 1971, and there's been some consent decrees back in 1978. In the 1980s, the union was held in contempt for not following it. The union and the EEOC told the court that recently things have improved in the decades since the last consent decree, but the judge rejected the unions and the EEOC's attempt to resolve this litigation, and so 53 years and the case is still going. I mean, I would seriously doubt that any of those attorneys who originally filed that case on behalf of members who were with the unions at the time, none of them are probably still around. But the case continues.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link aimea.org/thisweekatwork, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment, like LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere you are. And you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.